The space around Admiral Tabin looked like a graveyard of metal and fire. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching another Allied fleet die in the cold darkness. The enemy ships moved like living things crawling through space and eating everything they touched. These were the Hive, and they had been winning this war for 3 long years. Tabin was tall for his species, with blue-scaled skin and 4 arms that now gripped the command railings. His people, the Zalani, had fought in wars before, but never against anything like this. The Hive did not just defeat their enemies. They consumed them. They turned planets into feeding grounds and entire star systems into empty husks. The communication screens around him showed the faces of desperate commanders from across the galaxy. The bird-like Ethrans flapped their wings in panic. The crystalline Veltari spoke in chiming voices full of fear. Even the massive Drakmor warriors who had never retreated from any battle were talking about running away. The Great Alliance that had once contained 47 different species now barely held 12 worlds. Lieutenant Commander Wu Jin ran up to Tabin with another report in his 6-fingered hands. His face was pale, and his voice shook as he spoke. Admiral, 3 more colonies have gone dark. The Hive consumed the entire Kepler system in 2 days. The defense fleets never had a chance. Tabin closed his eyes and felt the weight of command crushing down on him. He had been fighting this war since it began, watching species after species fall to the endless hunger of the Hive. The enemy learned from every battle. They adapted to every weapon. Every tactic that worked once became useless the next time they tried it. The war room, behind the bridge, buzzed with desperate voices. Representatives from the remaining Allied species argued about their next move. The Nephrim floated in their gas-filled tanks, speaking in their whistling language about evacuation plans. The mechanical constructors calculated impossible odds with their computer brains. Everyone was talking about retreat. In the far corner of the room sat the human delegation. They were small compared to most other species, just 3 people in simple gray uniforms. The humans had only made contact with the galactic community 2 years ago, right after the war with the Hive had begun. They offered what help they could: some medical supplies, a few observation ships, nothing that seemed important enough to change anything. Commander Su Jin was the leader of the human group. She was shorter than Tabin, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. The other species barely noticed her. Most of them thought humans were too primitive to matter in a galactic war. Their planet Earth was far from the main fighting, and their technology looked basic compared to advanced alien weapons. The Hive had started this war by attacking the Outer Rim colonies. Nobody knew where they came from or why they fought. They just appeared one day with ships that looked alive and began consuming everything in their path. Their vessels were grown, not built. They had no metal hulls or energy shields. Instead, they were made of some kind of living tissue that could heal itself and adapt to damage. At first, the Alliance thought the war would be easy. The Hive ships looked organic and primitive compared to their advanced energy weapons and plasma cannons, but every battle taught the enemy something new. When the Alliance used laser weapons, the Hive grew armor that reflected light. When they tried missiles, the enemy developed point defense systems that looked like tentacles swatting flies. The worst part was how fast they adapted. A tactic that destroyed entire Hive fleets would be useless within days. The enemy queens sitting somewhere in the deep space would analyze every defeat and spawn new types of warriors designed to counter whatever had killed their last army. It was like fighting an opponent that became immune to everything you tried. Tabin walked into the war room as another species announced they were withdrawing from the Alliance. The gaseous Nephrim were evacuating their floating cities. The plant-like Sylvani were retreating to their deep forest worlds. Even some of the Drakmor clans were talking about abandoning the fight to save what remained of their people. The Ethran representative spread her golden wings wide as she spoke in her chirping voice. We cannot continue this war. The hive adapts faster than we can develop new weapons. Our homeworld will be consumed within months if we do not find a way to negotiate. Peace. Negotiate with what asked the Veltari commander, his crystal body ringing like a bell. The hive does not communicate. They do not take prisoners. They consume everything and leave nothing behind. How do you make peace with hunger itself? The room filled with the sounds of despair, clicking mandibles, whistling gas vents, electronic beeps from the constructors. Everyone was talking at once, and nobody had any real solutions. The alliance was falling apart, and the hive was getting stronger with every passing day. That was when Su-jin stood up from her corner. Her movement was so quiet that at first nobody noticed. But something about the way she rose to her feet made the room gradually fall silent. She was not large or impressive-looking, but there was something in her dark eyes that made even the massive Drakmor warriors pay attention. The human commander spoke in a voice that was calm and steady, but somehow carried to every corner of the room. Earth would like to offer more assistance to the Alliance. Our species has experience with difficult conflicts. We understand that desperate times call for desperate measures. The Ethrin representative laughed a harsh sound like breaking glass. What could your primitive species possibly offer that our advanced civilizations cannot provide? The hive has defeated fleets. With weapons beyond your current technology, what makes you think human involvement would change anything? Su-jin smiled. But it was not a happy expression. It was the kind of smile that made Tae-bin think of predators hiding in dark places waiting. For the right moment to strike, humans have certain advantages in warfare that other species might not appreciate. We are very good at adapting to changing situations. The Drakmor war chief Grak Tool slammed his massive fist on the table, his tusks gleaming in the artificial light. You speak of adaptation, but the hive adapts faster than any species in known history. They learn from every battle and counter every strategy. What could humans possibly do differently? The human woman looked directly at the towering warrior, and her smile grew slightly wider. We have been fighting each other for thousands of years before we ever met another species. Humans understand warfare in ways that peaceful civilizations might find disturbing. We know how to win wars that cannot be won using conventional methods. There was something in her tone that made the room uncomfortable. Several of the more peaceful species shifted nervously in their seats. The Silvani delegate actually moved his chair further. Away from the human corner, Tae-bin found himself studying Su-jin more carefully. He had dismissed the humans as unimportant newcomers, but now he was seeing something different. There was a coldness in her eyes that reminded him of the deepest parts of space where no light ever reached. It was the look of someone who had seen terrible things and done worse things in return. "What exactly are you proposing?" asked Tae-bin. His forearms crossed over his chest. Su-jin looked around the room meeting. The eyes of every representative present Earth requests permission to deploy our full military capabilities against the hive. We understand that the current rules of engagement have proven ineffective. Our species is prepared to take a more direct approach to ending this conflict. The room erupted in confused chatter. Most of the alien representatives did not understand what the human was really saying. They thought she was offering more ships and weapons. But Tae-bin was beginning to suspect that Commander Su-jin was talking about something very different, something that might change the nature of the war itself. The meeting broke up without any real decisions being made. Species after species announced they were pulling back their forces to defend their home systems. The Great Alliance was crumbling, and everyone knew it. Later that night, Tae-bin stood alone on his bridge, looking out at the stars. Many of those points of light had already gone dark, consumed by the advancing hive. Soon, his own homeworld might join them. Su-jin approached him quietly, her footsteps making no sound on the metal deck. She stood beside him, looking out at the same view of space. "Admiral," she said softly, "you are wondering what humans might do differently." In this war, Tabin nodded slowly. "Yes, I am wondering exactly that your species is new to galactic warfare. What could you possibly know that we do not?" The human woman was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Admiral, the other species in this alliance fight wars to achieve victory. Humans fight wars to survive. When survival is at stake, we become something very different, something that other species might not recognize as civilized." She turned to look at him directly, and Tabin saw something in her eyes that made his scales crawl. It was not madness exactly, but it was not sanity either. It was the look of a species that had learned to do whatever was necessary to live another day. The war you have been fighting follows rules and honor codes. The Hive does not follow your rules, Admiral. If you want to defeat them, you need to find someone who is willing to break every rule that civilized species hold sacred. Tabin stared at the small, human woman and realized that the Alliance might be about to discover what humanity really looked like when it stopped pretending to be peaceful. The thought both terrified and fascinated. 3 days after the Alliance meeting, Captain Jinwoo received a message that changed everything. The transmission came from deep in human space, encrypted with codes that made his hands shake as he decoded them. The message was from Admiral Park, Minho of Earth's Shadow Fleet. A military branch that officially did not exist, the orders were simple and terrifying. Gloves off, show them what humans really are. Jinwoo had been born on Earth during the final years of the Resource Wars. He remembered the orbital bombardments that turned entire cities into glass. He remembered the plague weapons that killed billions and the genetic viruses that hunted specific bloodlines. He had hoped those dark years were behind his species. Now it seemed they were about to return. For 2 years, humans had fought alongside the Alliance using only their basic ships and conventional weapons. They followed all the galactic rules of engagement. They tried to minimize casualties and protect civilian populations. The other species thought this was because humans were weak and peaceful. They had no idea that humans were holding back. Dr. Ha-Young ran through the corridors of Research Station, 7 carrying data chips that contained information no Alliance member should ever see. She was a small woman with graying hair and eyes that had seen too many terrible things. Her specialty was xenobiology, but her real talent was finding ways to kill alien life forms efficiently. The first Hive specimens had arrived 3 hours ago, captured drones that other species had studied for months trying to understand their biology. Dr. Ha-Young looked at them with different eyes. She did not want to understand them. She wanted to find their weaknesses and exploit them without mercy. While Alliance scientists had tried to communicate with the captured Hive drones, Dr. Ha-Young began dissecting them while they were still alive. She ignored their pain signals and focused on mapping their nervous systems. She tested acids and toxins and radiation on living tissue. She approached the problem like a human approach, all problems by finding the most efficient way to destroy the enemy. Colonel Da-Yun stood in the training facility watching human soldiers practice techniques that would horrify their alien allies. These were not the polite military exercises that humans had demonstrated before. These were the real methods that humanity had developed during centuries of warfare against itself. The Alliance species fought wars with honor and predictable strategies. They had codes of conduct and rules about targeting civilians. Da-Un was teaching her troops to ignore all of those limitations. She showed them how to use enemy civilians as shields, how to spread terror through populations, and how to make the enemy afraid to fight back. Sergeant Dong-Hoon practiced infiltration techniques that involved wearing the skin of dead enemies. Corporal Sora learned how to make improvised weapons from common materials that could kill dozens of people in seconds. Lieutenant Kyung-soo studied psychological warfare methods that could drive entire populations insane with fear. The training focused on one simple concept: humans would do whatever was necessary to win. They would use any weapon, break any rule, and cross any moral line if it meant survival. The Alliance species had spent centuries developing civilized warfare. Humans had spent the same centuries perfecting the art of complete destruction. The first test came when Hive Scouts approached the outer edge of human territory. The aliens expected the same defensive tactics they had seen from humans before: organized formations, energy weapons fired at maximum range, attempts to minimize damage to surrounding space. Instead, they found something completely different. Captain Wu Jin commanded the human response fleet, but his ships looked nothing like the vessels other species recognized. These were not exploration ships or medical transports. These were weapons of war built for one purpose only. The human vessels were dark and angular, covered in armor that absorbed sensor scans. They carried weapons that violated several galactic treaties, nuclear missiles that could crack planets, chemical warheads designed to poison entire star systems, kinetic bombardment systems that could destroy cities from orbit. When the Hive Scouts entered human space, they found no defenders waiting for them. The system appeared empty, abandoned. The bioships spread out to search for resources to consume. They followed their programming and began approaching the nearest planets. That was when Jin Woo sprung his trap. The space around the Hive Scouts suddenly filled with explosions, but not from energy weapons. These were nuclear devices disguised as space debris, hundreds of them hidden throughout the system and triggered simultaneously. The bioships that had adapted to survive plasma beams and laser cannons had no defense against raw atomic fire, but Jin Woo was not finished. When the surviving Hive ships tried to retreat, they found their escape routes blocked by clouds of radioactive particles. The humans had poisoned the space around them, making it impossible for the bioships to feed on the energy they needed to survive. The few Hive Scouts that escaped carried news of this defeat back to their queens, but the information they brought made no sense to the collective intelligence. How had humans hidden so many weapons without being detected? How had they known exactly where the Scouts would appear? The answer was simple, but terrifying. Humans had been studying Hive behavior, not to understand them, but to predict them. They had analyzed every battle record and identified patterns. In enemy movement, they had set traps based on mathematical models that treated the Hive like any other predator. News of the human victory spread quickly through Alliance communication networks. Species that had been retreating for months suddenly had questions. How had the primitive humans succeeded where advanced civilizations had failed? Sujin's answer was always the same. You asked us to help. You never asked us to be nice about it. Admiral Tabin requested a private meeting with the human commander. He needed to understand what his species had just allied themselves with. Sujin agreed to meet on his flagship, but she brought her own security team. The humans who accompanied Sujin did not look like the polite observers who had sat quietly in Alliance meetings. These were soldiers, and their equipment was clearly designed for killing rather than exploring. Their armor was black and functional. Their weapons had no decorative elements, just brutal efficiency. Admiral Sujin said. Tabin, as they sat in his private quarters, I need to understand what just happened in the Kepler system. Your ships used weapons that we did not know humans possessed. Your tactics were unlike anything we have seen from your species. Sujin smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. Admiral, humanity spent thousands of years fighting wars against itself. We developed weapons and strategies that civilized species like yours never needed. We learned how to kill efficiently because our survival depended on it. She leaned forward, and her voice became very quiet. The Alliance has been fighting the Hive with honor and rules of engagement. You try to minimize casualties and protect innocent lives. That is admirable, but it is not how you win. Wars against an enemy that wants to consume everything. Tabin felt a chill run through his scaled body. "What are you saying?" Su-Jin's eyes grew cold. "Humans know how to fight total war, Admiral. We know how to sacrifice anything and everything for victory. We know how to become monsters when monsters are what the situation requires. The question is whether the Alliance is ready to win this war, or if you prefer to lose with honor." The meeting ended with Tabin understanding that humanity had revealed only the smallest fraction of their true capabilities. The Alliance had asked for human help, never imagining what that help would actually look like. In the days that followed, more human fleets arrived from the depths of space. These were not the small observation groups the Alliance had grown used to. These were massive armadas carrying weapons that most species had never imagined. The war was about to change in ways that no one could predict, except perhaps the humans who had been preparing for this moment since the day they learned that hostile aliens existed. The turning point came at the Battle of Proxima 7. Alliance forces were trapped on the planet's surface, surrounded by a massive hive swarm that had cut off all escape routes. Traditional rescue attempts had failed spectacularly, with entire fleets consumed by the adaptive bioships. Commander Jae-sung arrived with the human expeditionary force, but his ships looked nothing like the sleek vessels other species used. These were brutal industrial constructs covered in armor plating and bristling with weapons that violated several galactic warfare conventions. The aliens had always fought with precision energy weapons and elegant tactics. Humans brought nuclear, missiles, kinetic bombardment systems, and chemical weapons. The Hive Queens, confident in their adaptive abilities, sent wave after wave of evolved drones to counter human tactics. But humans didn't rely on any single approach. When the bioships adapted to nuclear weapons, Major So-young switched to biological warfare, releasing engineered viruses that turned the Hive's own rapid evolution against them. When they adapted to the viruses, Captain Wu Jin began using psychological warfare, broadcasting sounds and signals that triggered primal fear responses in the collective consciousness. The most shocking moment came when Lieutenant Han Sol proposed using the planet itself as a weapon. While Alliance forces evacuated the surface, human engineers began destabilizing the planet's core. The Hive, believing they had won, sent their entire fleet to harvest the surface biomass. They were still feeding when Proxima 7 exploded, taking 17% of the Hive's total military strength with it. Alliance observers watched in horror and fascination as humans casually destroyed an entire world to win a single battle. Admiral Tabin realized he was seeing something that no other species possessed: the willingness to pay any price for victory. Humans didn't just fight wars, they waged them with a completeness that bordered on madness. The psychological impact on both sides was immediate. Hive forces began showing signs of actual fear, their collective consciousness struggling to process an enemy that couldn't be predicted or adapted to. Alliance morale soared as species that had been retreating for months suddenly had hope again. With the Alliance's attention finally focused on them, humans began sharing their military philosophy. General Moon Kyung-ho established training centers on 7 worlds, teaching alien commanders tactics their species had never imagined. The lessons were brutal: how to use terror as a weapon, how to exploit enemy psychology, and how to fight dirty when honor would get you killed. The first alien students were shocked by human casualness toward destruction. Captain Young Min demonstrated orbital bombardment techniques while eating his lunch, explaining how to maximize civilian casualties to demoralize enemy populations. Commander Nari taught infiltration tactics that involved impersonating dead enemies and using captured children as shields. These weren't desperate measures to humans, they were simply tools in the toolbox. Dr. Yoon-ji's Biological Warfare Division became the most feared unit in human space. She developed targeted plagues that could distinguish between hive biomatter and other organic compounds, essentially turning the aliens' own bodies into weapons. Her team also created pheromone bombs that disrupted hive communications, causing their perfectly coordinated swarms to attack each other in confusion. The hive, for the first time in their species' history, began to retreat not because they were outgunned, but because they were genuinely afraid. Their adaptive evolution, their greatest strength, became useless against an enemy that never used the same tactic twice and seemed to escalate violence to levels that defied logic. Other alliance. Members watched human tactics with mixture of admiration and revulsion. The bird-like Etherans complained that human methods were uncivilized, prompting Colonel Dongwu to respond, "Civilization is what happens after you win the war." The peaceful Zendari requested that humans avoid fighting near their worlds, afraid that even allied human presence would traumatize their empathic population. But results spoke louder than protests. Star systems that had been lost for months were being recaptured. Hive expansion had not just stopped, but reversed. For the first time since the war began, alliance forces were advancing on multiple fronts. The cost in destroyed worlds and civilian casualties was enormous. But humans had proven that sometimes the only way to preserve civilization was to abandon it temporarily. The Hive collective consciousness was experiencing something unprecedented: genuine terror. For millions of years, they had conquered galaxy after galaxy by adapting to any threat and consuming all resistance. But humans represented something outside their understanding, a species that seemed to grow more dangerous the longer the war continued. Fleet Admiral Park Suho had established forward bases in former Hive territory, using the aliens' own bioships as raw materials for weapons. Manufacturing. Human engineers had learned to reprogram captured drones, turning them into suicide bombers that returned to Hive clusters and detonated without warning. The sight of their own kind attacking them caused psychological breakdowns in Hive queens, some of whom began destroying their own broods to prevent capture. The most terrifying development was humans' adaptation to Hive biology. Dr. Min Seo's research team had developed symbiotic implants that allowed human soldiers to interface directly with Hive technology. Squads of cyborg Marines could now pilot bioships, use organic weapons, and even communicate through the Hive's telepathic networks. They had become something more and less than human, perfect killing machines designed specifically to hunt their enemy. Commander Sang-hoon led these hybrid forces in deep strike missions that penetrated Hive core. Worlds. They moved like ghosts through the enemy's collective consciousness, appearing as friendly biosignatures until the moment they began systematically exterminating entire populations. The psychological warfare was devastating. Hive queens could no longer trust their own sensory networks. The Alliance began to understand that humans possessed something unique among sapient species: the ability to become the thing they fought. While other races maintained their essential nature throughout conflicts, humans transformed themselves into whatever was necessary for victory. They studied their enemies not just to defeat them, but to surpass them entirely. As Hive resistance began to collapse, some Alliance members started expressing concerns about their human allies. The Veltari ambassador privately asked Admiral Tabin whether humans could be trusted to return to peaceful behavior after the war ended. The Admiral had no answer, because he was beginning to wonder if the humans they had unleashed could ever be contained again. The final Hive Queen died on a world whose name had been burned from all records. Major Kim Yuna stood over the massive corpse, her bio-enhanced armor still dripping with alien ichor. Around her, the last Hive stronghold burned with weapons that consumed matter at the molecular level. The war was over, but the victory felt more like a transformation than a triumph. Across the galaxy, Alliance species began tallying the cost of salvation. 17 worlds had been completely destroyed by human forces. 43 others were uninhabitable due to chemical or biological contamination. The hive had been utterly exterminated, but so had any pretense that the galaxy was a civilized place. General Kim Won-ho addressed the victory celebration with words that chilled every non-human listener. "We have proven that any species can be defeated if you're willing to become worse than they are. The hive consumed worlds, but we consumed the hive. The question now is whether we can remember how to stop consuming." Some alliance members quietly began developing contingency plans for dealing with humans. The peaceful Nephrim established new colonies in distant galaxy arms, as far from human space as possible. The militaristic Drakmor, who had initially admired human ruthlessness, now spoke of humans as the species that broke the warrior's code so thoroughly that victory became meaningless. But others embraced the new reality. The pragmatic Veltari entered into military alliances with Earth, understanding that humans had revealed fundamental truths about survival in a hostile universe. Species that wanted to live needed either human protection or human-level ruthlessness. Captain Lee In-ho commanded the new human deep space fleets, tasked with maintaining the peace through overwhelming force projection. His ships carried weapons that could sterilize entire star systems and crews who had been psychologically conditioned to use them without hesitation. The galaxy was safer than it had ever been, because everyone understood that challenging human authority meant facing extinction. In her final report, Admiral Su-jin wrote, "We saved the galaxy by showing it what monsters look like when they're on your side." The Alliance members wanted to survive, but they weren't willing to pay the real price of survival. Humans were. The question isn't whether we did the right thing. The question is whether we can live with being the kind of species that does whatever is necessary. The war was over. Humanity had won. And the galaxy would never be the same. Because now everyone knew what humans were really capable of when they stopped pretending to be civilized.